Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 241, Breaking Through the Extraversion Bias. If you're an introvert working in an organisation, I can almost guarantee that you've been subjected to bias. A bold claim? You bet, and one that I'll stand full square behind. The particular bias I'm talking about is the extraversion bias, or more specifically, for the sake of clarity, the bias towards the extrovert ideal. As I've shared in previous episodes, this bias is a complex, multi-headed beast, so it's neither easy to slay nor to tame. So why bother if it's such a difficult foe? Because I can't help myself, is my flippant answer. I was called flippant and facetious by my form teacher at school when I was 14, and I didn't know what either meant. And when I asked, her response was, exactly. My more serious answer to the why bother question is because introverts deserve to play on a level playing field without the bias holding them back. I had begun to think that we were past needing to talk about this bias until I came across a response to a post asking for people's thoughts about the difference between the way extroverts and introverts think to talk or talk to think. And I saw a response that had me cry, what the f... Here is the response, with my gobsmacked commentary interleaved. I talk to think. It's the only way I can make sense and process things. So probably an extrovert then. Cool. I'm often jealous for the support, space and understanding people give to introverts. I'm sorry, what now? But there was more. Chatty people often have to fight for credibility, and the comments I sometimes receive people would never make to an introvert for being quiet as they process. You gotta be kidding me. I had trouble not spitting my coffee out all over the screen when I read that. Pity the poor privileged extroverts, all of these accommodations being made for we needy introverts. Pah! Indulge me for a moment longer, as you'll soon see the point I'm making. When I ran women's leadership development courses, some men complained, that's discrimination. When we've had reason to call out misogynistic behaviour, some men have cried, not all men. And now we're actively enabling introverts to claim their place at the table. Some extroverts are protesting how they are jealous of the support and understanding we're getting. Well, in all of these cases, it's not before time. And this is what happens when a previously undervalued and mistreated section of society rise up so they are heard. Of course, it ruffles some feathers. But in our case, the courage that it takes an introvert to rise means we're past worrying over a few ruffled feathers. I'm definitely beyond ruffling feathers. I'm intentionally rattling the cages of those organisations who turn a blind eye to this bias, claiming that it either doesn't exist or not in this organisation. So in this episode, my aim is to provide introverts with tangible examples of the bias so that they start to recognise it clearly. More importantly, I will offer introverts who are already frustrated by how this insidious bias stifles their progress a few ways through and around the bias. The more of us who are proactive and take quiet yet powerful action, the more we'll deconstruct the bias and level the playing field for us all. So what are we actually dealing with? At its simplest, the bias towards the extrovert ideal is the idea that those who are sociable, talkative, and outwardly confident are better in some way, as those are supposedly inherently desirable traits. It's a social construct that seems to have gained traction over the last few decades, and if it's a construct, it can be deconstructed. Currently, it's so embedded in society, education, and organisations that we quieter ones believe what we think we're seeing and hearing. It's hard not to when it's everywhere, I agree, but not if we engage in some critical thinking and break the cycle. It's too easy for us to buy into the bias and allow it to consume us rather than face it sassily with a "so?" For many years, I've turned to face injustice and the invisible bindings that hold me back. Maybe not what you'd expect from a 5 foot and a smidge woman, but underestimate me at your peril. For instance, when I was told I couldn't be an engineer in BT back in the 80s because I was female and I wouldn't be able to lift manhole covers or climb poles or even drive a van I said to myself, okay, watch me. And they did. So a bit like the glass ceiling only exists as long as we don't try to smash it and choose to stay compliantly beneath it, and misogyny is tolerated as a norm until we name and shame, so the extraversion bias only holds power until we confront it, call it out, and challenge it. Because if we're not doing those things, we're colluding, and I, for one, am done with that. So this is another rallying call, and I'm thrilled to say that my quietly gutsy guild are amassing. Now to business. How are you likely to be impacted by the extraversion bias, and what can you do to move past it? Funnily enough, I had a long conversation with my team about how we overcome this bias. Some were for smashing it, but that seems way too violent for me. So because I see this as some kind of man-made wall, I'm in favour of breaking through. Those who run marathons talk about hitting the wall, and this is when a runner experiences a significant drop in energy, making it extremely difficult to continue. It typically occurs around 2/3 of the way through the race, so when the majority of the course has been completed. How similar to our experience of working in biased organisations. We put in a lot of the legwork, make progress, look at how far we've come, and then lose the will to continue. All of a sudden, it feels like a step too far. And of course, this is notoriously when we're most likely to cave in rather than gathering our resources to keep going. I want you to be able to come back to this episode when you feel like you're hitting the wall of bias. This episode is the one that will have you feel like you've got your coach beside you, encouraging and supporting you because they believe in you. And as a result, you'll believe in yourself more too. Well, I do believe in you. Here are 3 ways you may find yourself impacted and 3 things you can do to break through. As I'm sharing some of the obvious ways that my clients have shared with me, please recall your own experiences and by all means let me know what happened to you. Number 1, you've already been overlooked for a promotion and seen someone less experienced but more outgoing promoted ahead of you. If you're really unlucky, they may ask you for advice, which is really galling. Number 2, maybe you were not included in an exciting project that would have really benefited from your expertise. I've known people watch from a distance, able to see where the risks are being ignored and the issues poorly managed. And the result is that the project failed. Number 3, You have a really solid contribution to make in a meeting, but struggle to be heard as the usual suspects are dominating proceedings and the chair isn't able to keep them to the agenda. If anything like this has happened to you, you've probably been on the receiving end of this bias. If you're anything like me, this may have left you feeling frustrated, dejected, and wondering if there's really any point in applying for another position. So before you find yourself standing in front of that wall of bias, in danger of letting the next opportunity pass you by, do these things so that you are energized and on the front foot, ready to break through the wall. Word of warning, you won't necessarily feel comfortable doing these things initially because they're beyond your comfort zone and at your learning edge. But it is going to be helping you to promote yourself without the ick. Are you ready? Firstly, get into the habit of articulating your strengths positively so any team or leader knows they would be lucky to have you. For instance, rather than pretending to be a bubbly team player, talk about the benefits of being one of the quieter ones. You're able to take in everything that's being said, assimilate ideas, summarise, and keep people on point. I don't know any team that wouldn't welcome that. Next, get your CV and LinkedIn profile up to date and brimming with your skills and achievements. Your profile is often looked at even for internal promotions, and you never know who else is looking. Schedule a meeting with your leader or manager to talk about your career aspirations. People often think we lack ambition because we don't push ourselves forward all the time. So, you need to let those people with the ability to influence your career trajectory know what you really want. Lastly, when it comes to meetings being dominated by a certain few or not being chaired well, I recommend that you talk to the chair ahead of the meeting and share your concerns. Maybe you could agree a signal between you for when you want to make a contribution. And if you're feeling fired up enough, why not offer to chair the meeting to gain experience? That's how we all learn after all, by taking action and developing as we do. To hell with perfectionism. Give me done and still learning any day of the week. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if these 3 ideas left you feeling a bit wobbly and unsure of how to actually make them happen. That's what I'm here for, because these 3 are just the start. The good news is that there are many ways you can choose to work with me, and it could well be that your organisation sponsors you and picks up the tab. That's the beauty of choosing to work with a change agent who has over 30 years' experience of working with corporate clients and in organisations globally. And that's what I bring to this table. The hard fact of the matter is that until we start to challenge some of our beliefs about what we think is possible, we are actually colluding with the bias. This is not for the faint-hearted or those happy to complain from deep inside their comfort zones. Comfort doesn't equal safety, it just assures more of the same, and that's not enough for me. I'm specifically calling forward those who are change makers and leaders in their own right. When you feel ready to join the guild and deconstruct this bias, I'll be there shoulder to shoulder with you, helping you to define what's possible for you and build your credibility so that you can be visible on your own terms. It's time to take your rightful place at the table and be taken seriously. As Barack Obama said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek. Change happens when we collectively and individually take intentional action. So are you with me? If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.